Hello, my name is Manisha and I come from, can you hear me okay? Yeah, great. Centre for Inclusive Design. I am a migrant to this country and I live in this fantastic place, Maroubra, down near the ocean. So lovely to hear about the ocean too. And when I go up to the headlands in Maroubra and I turn to the right past Magic Point, I can see Botany Bay, where those first ships came to Australia. And when I think about those first ships and my culture and my family, I'm reminded that some of those ships were actually built in India. And in fact, Governor Phillip was in India before he was here. So when I think about my topic today, I'd like to start not here in Australia, but back in India at the time of the Raj. See, they had a problem then. It was a health epidemic. It wasn't COVID. It was these things, cobras. And we had lots and lots of people that time being bitten by cobras. I can see some of you nodding. You might know this story. But, the challenge was that the people at the time, the powers that be, decided the best way to combat this problem was actually to put an incentive out for dead cobras. And it worked really well, right? Like all of a sudden there were these dead cobras coming in and people being paid 20 rupees, say, for each dead cobra. It was working really well. There was just one problem. And that problem was there were more people being bitten and dying from cobra bites. So some of the officers, the story goes, went down to find out what was going on. And what they realised was something that, I certainly know, and that is that a lot of Indians are really entrepreneurial. Seems like it's part of our blood. And when the cobras were $20 and actually the farming land was worth less, well, it made sense to start building cobra farms, didn't it? So, yeah. So, of course, when the officers went back and told, the governors what was going on, they said, well, that's a bit of a waste of money, isn't it? It wasn't even taxpayers' money then, but, and so they got rid of the incentive. And so you can guess what happened, right? All those farmers, they weren't getting paid anymore for those cobras, so they just let them out. There's no need to kill them anymore. So, of course, and the reason I tell you this story is, and many of you would have heard of, I think it's Hurst Seabird, and the cobra effect. It's when we have really good intentions that have really bad consequences. And we know these. We've seen them all. Who's heard of the cane toad? Who's heard of robo-debt? This is something we do over and over as humans. We do things for the right reasons, but get the wrong outcome. And the reason I'm telling you about this is because I believe there is a way through this. There's a way for us to actually start to get different outcomes and see things differently. And my journey into this kind of space really started when I started a company that was going to become a little charity, actually, that was going to become the Centre for Inclusive Design. And so I'm in my first day in this organisation and I'm sitting in the tea room because I knew that if I sat in that tea room all day for at least 2 days, I'd find out more about the organisation than I would sitting in that little corner office all on my own. And so I drank a lot of tea, went to the bathroom an awful lot, but I met some incredible people. And one of them was a guy named Bob. And Bob was a little bit older than I was, and he had this smile that would light up the room, came from the Central Coast. And I sort of said, what I was saying to everyone, it's like, well, Bob, what can we do? What's the use of this organisation? How can we help? And he said to me, look, my issue is that I need to get an education. And I need an education so that I can get a job, because without some sort of diploma or certificate, I can't get a job. I said, well, what do you want a job in? He said, well, I don't care. He said, I've done everything from photography to accounting and I can't get through the course. So my first thought was, well, not everybody, belongs in Torrens University. Not everyone can finish a degree. You need to apply yourself. There's all sorts of things you need to do. But see, that wasn't the problem, because Bob was deaf and he needed an Auslan user to do his courses. And at any given time, and we're only talking, this is 6 years ago, at any given time when he started a course At the beginning of the course, he had the supports he needed. But at some point in every one of those 7 courses, someone said to him, sorry, we can't afford the Auslan interpreter, or there's no one available. And when that subject was a core subject, that was the end of his course. 2 days later, I'm at a conference, and I don't normally do well sitting in conferences. This is great. We're telling stories. This was a conference about Australian telecommunications and consumers. It was really boring, but I've never been so immersed before in my life, because as I was sitting there and my mind wandered, they had a teleprompter and I could see where people were up to. And when the person on the stage was a little bit boring, there was an Auslan interpreter, because they'd designed this conference for diversity. And I realised that if we just designed the world for Bob, we'd be making it better for everyone. And humans are incredible people. And if you want to find the best hacks, the best innovations, I say the best place to look at it are the people who have to design the world around the way we've made it. This is one of my favourite pictures of all time. It's Ed Roberts and the Rolling Quads. Sounds like a band from the 60s. Not quite. Advocacy group. And I don't know how many of you can see this picture very clearly. It's really dark because it was taken in the middle of the night. And Ed is the gentleman at the front there. He's a wheelchair user, as are most of these people. And what he's got in his hand is a hammer. And he's hammering that footpath to make a curb cut. Because in the 60s, when he was at college in California, he couldn't get from his house to the university without someone carrying him over that curb, right? Because the wheelchair wasn't going to go over it. And the reason that curb cuts are really important now is for all of us. If it wasn't for those curb cuts, we wouldn't get our car into our garage. When I have a sprained ankle, that curb cut when I'm trying to cross the road is really important. Or when I have a pram. We call this the social model of disability. It works for the person with disability. But in fact, most of those curb cuts, we're not using them for people who are wheelchair users. We're using them for all of us, whether we have situational or temporary disabilities. And this word is really important because back in the day, we thought disability was about people and we had to make them normal. Now we know through the social model of disability that disability is when we don't create the world for other people. And when we think about this from an innovation perspective, some of the best things we've ever created come from looking at the world differently. Whether we're talking about disability or age or race or gender, all of these things have created some of the best products we use. For instance, how many people in this room have a electric toothbrush? Those toothbrushes, we know they work really well, right? They're actually formed because how many people in this room spend most of their days not using their hands in a hospital? Not many of us, right? But that's where electric toothbrushes came from. In fact, because, those poor nurses, they brush the first person's teeth, 2 minutes. By the 15th person, your hand starts to hurt. And they worked out that people who couldn't use their arms were actually having more tooth decay than other people. Start of the electric toothbrush. There are so many things that we've created in this world by looking at the edge. And when we're thinking about the 4th Industrial Revolution and what we want this world to be, wouldn't we look at the people that the 3rd Industrial Revolution failed? They have insights that I certainly don't. And when we think about this and we think about Australia, well, actually, wrong slide. But when we think about this and we think about our communities and our customers, this picture is actually a picture of the bell curve, right? We always think about the bell curve and who do we go for? The people in the middle. If we flatten the bell curve, which is what this is, you see some really interesting things that relate to the biases that we all have. For instance, those people in the middle, the people that design works for, they're often really close to each other. They're like each other. The people on the edge that any design doesn't work for, they're not only far away from the middle, they're far away from each other. So when you're designing something and you have 5 people who say something pretty good, it's really easy to go, actually, our product must be awesome. it works for most people because that group in the middle looks like most people. But actually, Microsoft did this study this is way back when, in 2003, and they talked about whether technology worked for people. And the numbers on this, there we go, were slightly different to what we'd expect. So the design in the middle worked for 21% of people. People the design didn't work for was 25%. Now, when we think about 25%, we know that about 18.5% of people in the world have some sort of disability. 70% of that is invisible. We're not just talking about people with disability here or people who don't speak English or whatever it is. And if you design for the middle, how many great experiences are we going to have next to if we design for the edge? Because the kicker number is actually the one in the middle, the 53% of people who design works for, but it's annoying, it's stubborn, doesn't work particularly well, but we make do. When we design for the edge, we design for all of us. And let's just face it, Australia is diversity. How many people here fit the average? None of us do. None of us have the average hand length, the average body size, the average shape. Australia did a study, I think at the last census, where they looked for the Australian average person. It's a woman. They have 3 children, 2-storey house in the outer suburbs of Melbourne. They work in sales. And their parents come from England, but they're actually born in Australia. Anyone fit the average? In fact, they looked for this person. They can't find them because it's a mythology. There's no such thing as average. We come from different places, from different worlds. Our families come from different places. And yet when we design things and we create things, often we go for people who are really easy for us to find, people like us. And, when we do this, we miss out. We miss out on a lot. Today, when we think about the 4th Industrial Revolution, one of the things that's really important is this growth of individualised experiences. So, for instance, how many people in this room have a smartphone? I'm figuring most of us do, right? But who thinks they use their phone in exactly the same way as somebody else? None of us do. If it wasn't for people who couldn't see, we wouldn't have had the first voiceover technology, which was kind of the precursor to something like Siri. The first gesture control came from carpal tunnel. Companies like Apple are becoming health companies rather than communication companies because they've started looking at older people. So when we think about this edge, it's not about building one thing like a ramp for everyone. It's about creating hyper-personalised experiences for all of us. And when we do this, our research shows us that you reach 3 to 4 times your intended audience, not just because you're reaching the person on the edge, but because that person on the edge is giving you the gold. They're the canary in your gold mine that gives you other customers and better experiences and more rewarding experiences for everyone. And when we don't do this, the consequences are really important and affect all of us. We're talking life and death. So I'm just going to give you one example here. Do people remember the oximeter? When we were in the middle of COVID, these things were really important, right? Because they measured the oxygen in your blood. I'm not a health professional, but basically if your oxygen levels dropped too much, it gave people some insight that actually your COVID outcomes weren't as good as you'd hope they would be, and you needed to go to the hospital. Really important when the hospitals were actually overburdened. In America, what we know about these things is that they actually don't work particularly well if you've got dark skin. Okay. The government knew this. Everyone knew this, actually. It wasn't a new thing. But people had decided that was okay. But when COVID hit, what happened was 2 things. And I think this is really important. It's not just about creating the right products, but also creating the right ecosystems and the right cultures within our organisations. Because when these were used and people went to the hospital and said, I'm really not feeling good, in America, we've now seen the results of the studies. If you were Asian or black, chances are this machine would have a false result. You're less likely to get a bed than someone without brown skin. And then on top of it, to add insult to injury, if you're of Asian descent, you are more likely to be believed that you were in difficulty than if you are African, American or black. Okay. That second part, culture. First part, product. We need to change both. We need to do this together. We need to have the right people at the table at the right times, and we need to hear their voices. And so how do we do this? All of us can do this in all of our work. It doesn't matter what vertical you work in. It doesn't matter what you're creating. We're all designers of the future. So I have 3 small steps here for you. The first is invite the edge in. How many of us know someone with a disability? Hands up. How many of us know someone who's ageing? How many of us know someone who lives in a remote or rural community? And how many of us design for those people when we design normal products every day? We know these people. Let's bring them into our design. It's not too difficult, and it's not something we do at the end. It's something we do right at the beginning. And think about your senses. A really quick way of thinking about this is, what if someone couldn't hear? What if someone couldn't see? Can everyone access my product? Who have I built my system, my policy, my experience, whatever it is for? And get rid of your fear and shame. Because one of the things that we often feel is, I don't want to talk to that person, or I'm nervous because I might say the wrong thing. And when we do that, we often step back. And we don't want to feel like bad people. So we step back again. And we might blame them, because if only they did something differently, I'd be able to work with them. So that person who's done nothing actually gets disadvantaged more than once. But that's our problem, right? And most of the people we talk to, we just say, look, sorry, I don't know. I'm going to get it wrong. And let me tell you, I get it wrong every day in some shape or form. But I learn from that. It's just a journey. And when we do, we create things that are so beautiful. The world is full of beauty. We just need to let it in. And can you imagine if we were back in that time, or if we took the problem that they had with those cobras to now, and we decided to create with those farmers in those farms to create something that would save their lives? Maybe we'd have houses on stilts, or we'd have, VR mongooses, or we'd have a vaccine that they created and a brand new industry. So the next time you're looking at creating something, think about who's at your table and think about how you might let innovation in. It's not too difficult. We just need to take that first step. Thank you.